What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, I'm here with Dr. Josh Bowen, who has released a just a second edition, not a revised edition. It's
Yeah,
just a second edition.
what did Megan write? She wrote, revised and greatly expanded.
Yes, it is greatly expanded. So we are going to be discussing J Warner Wallace today and his defense of biblical slavery. I say defense of biblical slavery because he definitely twists it like all other apologists do, but he's going to do it while pretending to be a detective still. And I've got Dr. Josh here. I'm tapping the source on anti-apologetics, I guess, like against the apologists on slavery.
Yep.
And this was actually something that was released recently by J Warner Wallace, but I think that part of it was potentially released earlier because I think I know I responded to J Warner Wallace on genocide before. And which I think that I even consulted you about some of the genocide stuff potentially. But in any case, now he's asking the question, does the Bible condone slavery? So we're going to be getting into that today. But first off, I really want to shill for Dr. Josh's book because the first edition was really good, provided a lot of great resources for people, to have conversations like this. This is one of those topics that's starting to be talked about a whole lot more. And also, Josh and I have a very uncomfortable past with this topic. I feel like I always have to bring it up because of the debate we did with G-Man and somebody else that G-Man was with. Veckel, that's right. It was very uncomfortable.
Very.
But in any case, Josh, why don't you tell us about your new edition of I believe it's Does the Bible Condone Slavery, right?
Or close. Did the Old Testament endorse slavery?
Did the Old Testament. Okay. So tell us about the book. What's been added to it? Why did you pad it 500 extra pages?
Yeah. So when I wrote it initially, it was meant to just sort of be, I don't know, to fit how often I thought I would end up talking about it, which was not very often, right? I thought I'd put this book out, I'd put out some videos, I'd done a couple of debates. It's like, okay, I'll just put this thing out there and it'll put it to bed. As you are painfully aware, this topic is one that continues to rear its very ugly head. And so after a couple of years of this book being out, I thought, my God, the apologetic arguments aren't going away. They're just morphing. And what I found out had happened is in a lot of cases, I try to be pretty meticulous with my research and I try to provide pretty thorough bibliographies. And what I noticed started happening was people started citing references that surprised me. Like, oh, Laura Culbertson from the Oriental Institute has this 2011 publication on slaves and household. And I'm like, why do you know about that? Oh, because I talked about it in my first book, right? I talked about it in my book. That's why you know about that. And so people were starting to use the sources, which is great, but they weren't really understanding what the sources were saying. Have you ever seen that with scientific papers, John? Like, they read something and they say, oh, look, this paper, about blood on ancient dinosaurs, and you're like, oh my God, you don't really understand what that actually is saying.
And I've seen it in the evangelical treatments of history, like whenever they're trying to like justify something about Jesus or his resurrection or something like that. They'll regularly use sources and cite people, but they won't, like, it'll be quote mining and everything. So
yeah. So what happened from that is, and I talk about this, I feel like, quite a bit now, but I describe it as throw it up against the wall and see what sticks, apologetics. And so while that's really frustrating in the moment, for somebody to be like, oh, I read, this this book by Klaus Wilke, about slavery, and you're like, yeah, but it's like from the early third millennium slavery, and it's in Mesopotamia. You can't just like connect those things to. They're like, oh, well, it says here, and you're like, oh my god. So that it's just but it's them just throwing something up against the wall, and you take the time, you research what they're saying. Immediately, they have no idea what they're talking about, but it takes time to make a presentation on that and to actually prove to them they don't know. And then once you spend all that time and you say, see how it doesn't work, they go, yeah. But what about this one? And so while that's really frustrating, it gave me quite a bit of fodder. And so I ended up addressing a lot of these new arguments in the second edition. So to kind of give the viewer an idea, here's the first one. It's a little over 200 pages. That's the second one. So it's a little bit bigger.
Just a little bit.
But it's Megan did such a good job on the cover. Sorry, I'm just stoked about it. You won't have the band, not for resale across the front, obviously. But that's the proof copy that came. We've looked through it. It looks great. So yeah, it's got some major appendices in the back. There's some new chapters. I deal with slavery in the New Testament, slavery in the early church, slavery in the antebellum South. I have this huge comparative chapter on slavery in the ancient Near East and comparing it to the Hebrew Bible. And then the appendices essentially go through every slave law that we have from the ancient Near Eastern law collections, all of them. And I provide translation and commentary on each one, along with a whole host of other texts and stuff. So there's a lot in the new one. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I do have a copy of it, and I plan on reading it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet with all the new material, but I can't wait for it because, constantly whenever I'm getting into conversations, morality and then eventually slavery, gets brought up, and so it's always nice to have that. Well, you can't really keep it in your back pocket anymore, but it's nice to have it in the back of your mind.
No, that's true. It's definitely a topic that comes up way more than I ever anticipated. So, if people are if they go look for it on Amazon right now, there's sort of been a bit of a glitch. So we had the Kindle on pre-order for the past couple of weeks, and then we updated got the final PDF put on to Amazon and hit publish. And the paperback went live, so you can get the paperback right now. But they wouldn't let us publish the Kindle officially until this Saturday. So it's another 2 days before it'll actually go up. So you can still pre-order it, which is great. If people pre-order the Kindle, it like boosts the rankings up. So it goes out to more people. So that would be awesome. But anyway, yeah, pretty excited.
Nice. Yeah. So if y'all enjoyed the first one and are planning on getting the second one, definitely remember to go back and leave a review or
Thank you.
star or whatnot. That's really going to help. I know the last time you released it, I think like every single time you release a book, it like jumps to the top, in its niche.
Well, we have an amazing community, honestly,
Yeah.
that supports us. And it does not hurt that Seth Andrews has been texting me today saying, how do you pronounce this? And is this how this is pronounced? So Seth is doing the audio for this one too. So
Nice.
Pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I'm actually working on the editing portion of an audiobook that we recorded, and it's fucking hell.
Yes. He has become like some sort of an expert at it, and he just handles all of it. So it's great.
Nice. All right. Well, we are going to be getting into J Warner Wallace. If y'all don't know J Warner Wallace, I lovingly call him the dipshit detective. He has, he puts out content regularly, and one of the topics that he loves to talk about, it seems like, is biblical slavery. And he's along the lines of Frank Turek, other people in this. So I don't think that we're going to hear anything new, but I would love to hear Josh's reaction to this. So we are here to listen to Josh, I guess react to J Warner Wallace, the things that he's saying, how wrong they are, and have Josh elaborate on why J Warner Wallace is wrong, because that's what we're here for.
Excited?
Yes, I am too. Now, Josh, be sure if you can't hear this, let me know and I'll figure out what's wrong, but you should be able to hear it.
Does the Bible condone slavery? When I first started reading.
Okay, that's a good first question. Let's stop right there. Josh?
Yeah, see, this is the thing. It even here, the way this discussion is framed, using the words Bible and condone, right? Those are things that have to be parsed out immediately, because what do we mean when we say the Bible, as that might seem like a straightforward answer? There are lots of implications that are coming in. What J Warner Wallace means is my particular interpretation of the whole Bible, right? And his interpretation of the text, those 66 books, allows him to, from a hermeneutical standpoint, say, well, okay, sure, there might be this sort of bad verse back here, but look in the New Testament, right? Or look in this other part in Isaiah, and it talks about like freedom and like these things interpret this other verse. Well, that's a theological interpretation that he's coming to the Bible with. So when he says, does the Bible, there is no such thing as like the Bible's interpretation, right? It's his interpretation and the theological lens that he views it through. So that's number one. But even using the word condone, like the word condone has two main nuances that we see, but that like one can just be to allow something, right? With no real, implication for whether it's right or wrong. It's just, yeah, I allow it. But normally when people use condone, they mean like, I know this is bad. Like, I know I shouldn't let my kid have this extra lollipop before dinner, but I don't want to deal with the crying. And so, all right, I will condone this. It's not the best. It's not what I want. I'd prefer they not do it, but I'm going to allow it for this other reason. And so, like, using condone, I think even is a subtle thing that he's trying to sort of sneak in right at the front. So those are things I think to pay attention to as we move through.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the things that I've heard, and I don't know if you cover this in your book, but one of the most recent arguments I heard was that the Bible, or rather Christians, didn't condone slavery because of the slave Bible, which is, the Bible where they cut out all the references to like, freedom and freeing the slaves from Egypt and all that kind of stuff. So the argument is they had to change God's words in order to make it condone slavery. What do you think about that?
I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. Yeah, I can't think of a better analogy or a good analogy for this. When you read through the Bible, particularly when you read through the Hebrew Bible, one of the main stories that comes out over and over and over and over and over again is the Exodus, right? And so one could read that and be like, oh my gosh, look, freedom from slavery, freedom from Egypt. I'm here to release you and to bring you out of the land and bring you into this great, like God's all about freedom. The problem is that it's only for a specific group of people, right? So sure, like you can read through the Old Testament and come out thinking, man, like freedom from slavery is the best, right? That must be what God wants. And that's what they didn't want, right? They didn't want this idea of freedom. That's an overarching feeling that you get. That the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is written specifically to a group of people, right? It's written for a particular group of people, and so when you read through these passages, and it's like You can't enslave your fellow Israelites, right? You can't charge interest on loans to your fellow Israelites. You can't do this other thing to your fellow Israelites. That's not everybody. That's just one group. But if you just sort of read through, the feeling that you'll walk away with because of the intended audience of the text is, yeah, like freedom's a good thing, right? Like freedom from slavery, being delivered from slavery. But that doesn't have any bearing on like this more specific reading of the passages themselves, right? The idea that, first of all, the idea that the slaves were going to be going back and reading through Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 and like really parsing that out, I think is a little stretching credulity, maybe. No, that they're reading through the Exodus story and going, we don't want that in here, right? And we don't want these other things that talk about being kind and being loving, which is an ancient Near Eastern thing that you'll see all over the place in textual sources. So yeah, I mean, it just doesn't do the heavy lifting that I think people that argue for the slave Bible is an important thing. And the last thing I'll say is, even if, let's just grant for the sake of argument, that the reason that they cut all that stuff out is because they looked at Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 and said, like, this promotes freeing people, and this is not pro-slavery, so we have to cut it out. Let's just assume that for the sake of argument. That doesn't mean that they were right in their interpretation of the text. Now, that's not why they did it, right? But even if they had, it's irrelevant to the discussion here because it has no bearing on whether that's actually what that passage talks about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way that I believe I responded to him was just that, you didn't actually have to change the words in the Bible. You just had to cut sections out. So the Bible can be shown to support either position, and both sides use the Bible to support their respective positions. The abolitionists use the Bible to support their position, and the slave owners use the Bible to support theirs. So, like, I feel like that kind of renders it moot as far as like, oh, well, the Bible's anti-slavery because of this, and so yeah. All right. So now that's the question, and somebody asked, why is this even a subject for debate? Now, for me, I know that for me, it's important for two reasons. One, historical reasons. Like, in general, I'm very interested in history, and, knowing the surrounding contexts of all of this is very interesting to me. And then two, there's also for me, like, even if Yahweh were real, there's no way that he could be like the moral foundation for anything. And like, so even if he were real, there's no way that I would follow him. And so in that way, slavery factors into the reasons why I don't consider this Yahweh God to be worthy of worship and all this other stuff. So those are the reasons why I find this conversation interesting. But I mean, that's a pretty good question, I guess, maybe for you, Dr. Josh, before we continue on. What kind of got you interested in discussing and academically analyzing like the topic of slavery in the Bible?
I think bad apologists, right? So like the early exposure that I had to this was watching Woody and Meme respond to Alex O'Connor, who responded to the guy whose name the Beat, Alan Parr. So Alan Parr did a video, Alex responded to that, and then What Do You Mean responded to that. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is ridiculous. First, what Alan Parr said was just so, either he just didn't read the text at all, or he was just being really, really sneaky, because like he'd only put in like certain portions of certain verses that seemed to support his position. And I just suspect he didn't take a lot of time to study it. It's hard for me to imagine he was being like duplicitous in that sense. But then to watch John McCrae respond so hard to Alex O'Connor, who was actually putting up a pretty balanced if I remember it, like a pretty balanced response, just sort of got me saying, oh my gosh, like, yeah, there are a couple things that Alex is saying that need to be nuanced a little bit. But I mean, like the criticisms that were being leveled against him were just ridiculous. And so I feel like what's happened with me is I've become like this social media slavery fact checker, right?
Mhm.
Like I go into like I spend some time in Clubhouse, um, and I feel like I go in there and pretty often I'll hear like, oh, hey, Dr. Josh, like, is this true what he's saying about this passage in the Old Testament? About slavery or about genocide or whatever. And so it's been really useful, I think, certainly for me, but I think it's been beneficial to everybody to sort of have a good understanding on both sides of what slavery in the Hebrew Bible and the ancient Near East was like, what these passages actually say.
Yeah. I totally agree. So let's continue with J Warner Wallace and his defense of biblical slavery. You ready for it, Josh?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if I am.
Hmm.
Casey is, so I guess we're going.
When I first started reading through scripture, I started to see that there were descriptions in the New Testament and the Old Testament involving slaves. And these descriptions were relatively benign, as though we were to take for granted the existence of slaves. Does God condone slavery? Does God just accept this as just the way it's going to be, the way it's always been?
Could you pause
How
it?
could that be?
I
couldn't imagine.
So even the way that he framed that, descriptions of slavery, and that's a big apologetic argument on its face, right? Like, oh yeah, I mean, sure, the Bible describes lots of terrible things. I mean, read about the prostitute, I mean, not the concubine that gets like gruesomely killed in Judges, what, 19, or think about all the sinful things that these people did. Sure, the Bible describes terrible stuff, but when it comes to the topic of slavery, this is in the laws, right? This isn't just some description of it. It's like Yahweh handing something down and saying, here's what I want you to do. Here are the laws, right, that I want you to abide by. So yeah, describing it as descriptions is, I don't know. I don't know if it's poisoning the well, but it's setting up the listener to think a certain way about it, I think, or maybe not intentionally, but
It does seem kind of distancing to me, like he's trying to maybe distance God from him directly commanding like the taking of slaves, which he does on a few occasions. More, and this is aside from his commandments about how to properly buy slaves and treat slaves and all this other stuff. So, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I do want to emphasize, everybody, that if you have a question for Dr. Josh about slavery, or maybe you've heard an argument that we haven't really covered before, send in a super chat. That's the best way that you can get our attention, and Dr. Josh will respond to it and give you his best information concerning that particular argument. So definitely consider sending in a super chat. Any level of super chat with your question in it, feel free to send it in. So we'll answer it. All right, let's continue. So we got there's several different descriptions of slavery. Let's see if we can parse this out like a homicide detective.
It's always been. How could that be? I couldn't imagine a God that would condone such a horrific thing. But I think part of the problem is in answering this kind of an objection is just understanding the definition of slavery. Look, when we hear that word, we always refer in our mind to what we know as New World slavery, right? The kind of slavery that we engaged in here in America that was so repulsive. But is that the same as ancient Near Eastern slavery? Even though the word may be the same, is the concept the same?
Now, I just want everybody to pay attention to how he's going to do this, because when I watched this the first time, I thought, yeah, okay. And this is a common apologetic approach, right? We're going to try to focus on the ways that they're different, right? Like, and no matter how small that difference might be, let's focus on how they're different. And if we can just paint the picture of, look, difference, another difference, see, they can't be the same. It's like, okay, did they own the person as property? Well, yeah. Okay, pretty big similarity between those, right? Why didn't we start with that one? So yeah, it's funny to watch him. Funny might not be the right word, but
yeah. Well, no, I laugh at it at this point. Generally, I laugh at bad arguments, and I just feel like apologists like J Warner Wallace, Frank Turek, the list could go on and on with people that have made similar bad arguments. But I just I find myself laughing at them just because it's like such a bad argument. It's hilarious, and I think your reaction the first time that I heard you kind of respond to this distinction without a difference, I believe is the way you characterized it maybe at one point, but is like, here's owning a person as property, and here's owning another person as property, but not as bad. It's like they're still both owning people as property.
Here's this pig. Let me paint some lipstick on it. See how it's so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh.
All right. Let's see what he's got for us. This distinction without a difference.
They are two very different things in a number of ways. Number one, the benefit, the financial benefit that slavery offered in the New World was that the slave owner got all the benefit. In the ancient Near Eastern version of this term, often it was the slave himself who entered into slavery because of a financial debt that was owed.
Okay. So, I should not be laughing at this. But I'm laughing because it's so depressing. That doesn't make sense. But Megan sent me a clip to, I think it was a TikTok video today, and I didn't have time to watch it, but she explained what it was about. And it was a woman of color who was reading through, I'm going to get it wrong. Maybe it was in Florida. Actually, you guys might know this. That was schools are teaching in middle school, I think, the benefits that slaves received in the antebellum South. Is that, am I getting that right?
You're right. Florida is requiring part of the curriculum to teach that slaves receive benefits. So slavery oftentimes benefited the slaves, which is contradictory. I was actually going to mention this before, or when I stopped it, I was about to mention it, but you started mentioning it. But so Florida mentions that there's benefits for slaves in antebellum South slavery, and they want to basically whitewash slavery in Florida and paint it as being a good thing.
The example,
another person,
John, the example that I always give when this comes up is, if somebody breaks into somebody else's house and ties, the owner up and pours gas all over the house and sets the house on fire, it goes to walk out and says, you know what? I'm just going to take them with me. And they pick up the bound person, carry them out of the burning house, put them in their van, their white van with no windows, right? And then drive them to their house and lock them in their basement and keep them there as a kidnap victim for 25 years, right? And feed them every day, maybe once a month or so, let them, under close observation, walk around the neighborhood once, let them take showers. If during the trial, the defense attorney were to say, well, I mean, think about the benefit to the kidnap victim. I mean, they didn't die, right? And my God, they really benefited from this. They had a nice, clean place to stay in the base, given food. Often it was pizza, right? Let them walk around the neighborhood. I mean, that really benefited them.
They had a can to shit in.
Just like, okay. Sick flex, bruh. Sick flex.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really kind of weird to hear. Well, I mean, for one thing, J Warner Wallace is saying, "Oh, the slave owners had all of the benefit," but I feel like he's obviously where anytime I hear somebody starting to go down this path, I'm like, oh, okay, so they only consider slavery in the Bible to be debt slavery because that seems to be what he's describing here, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, like, there are lots of different types of slavery that sort of fall under the general categories of debt slavery and chattel slavery and sex slavery, right? There are different nuances, particularly to debt slavery. There's famine slavery, which is not necessarily debt related per se, but I mean, like, it's more of a hardship. But the point is that it's read Second Kings 4:1. Anybody that thinks like that listens to him and says, "Man, this is a really good argument. This is really beneficial to the slave, even the debt slave." Read Second Kings 4:1, where the widow woman says to Elisha, "Hey, my husband took out a loan from a creditor. He's died. We can't pay the loan back because we're poor. So we don't have any money. And now the creditor is coming to take my 2 children away." Hooray! Is that what she says? No, right? She says, "Help, like, help. The creditor's coming to take my 2 kids away as slaves," right? And so Elisha then provides oil and the jars and all this stuff. And so, like, I don't, slavery's not a good thing, Jay. It's just not a good thing. It doesn't matter if there's some benefit, right? Like it's like, well, you talk about this, and then I'll shut up. But you talk about this all the time. Like, if the appendix has some function, and I don't even know that it does, but let's say that it has some function today, well, then it can't be a vestigial, like a vestigial organ or something. Or if like a, I don't know, if like a, I was gonna say a whale penis, but
And 15-foot some bitches. Okay, what about them?
yeah, I'm here to help. But like, if there's some use, some minor ancillary use to a vestigial, organ or part or something, well, that means that it's not vestigial because look, it has a use. It's like, no, like the body like found something to do with it, right?
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that it was designed that way, right? And so anyway, yeah, that's the same
Yeah.
sort of argument here. Well, there is some benefit. So therefore what, Jay? Therefore what? So there's some benefit to the slave? Cool. That makes it
Well,
okay? I don't understand.
yeah, and in Jay's description of it, he seems to rule out like the what was it, Second Kings 4:1 is what you said.
Mhm.
Because I was thinking of that. I'm like, he's talking about like, oh well, these are people that have sold themselves into slavery to escape, debt, like crumbling debt or poverty. But it's like there are instances where you enter into a kind of debt slavery where you didn't choose to go into it, like you were
That's right.
forced into it,
Yeah.
like as a child, and things of that nature. And there's
Yeah.
several different nuances around all of that to where you can. I know that there's one loophole where you can be a debt slave, but then also become a full-time chattel
Yeah.
slave. And so like these are issues in it. So I feel like J Warner Wallace is definitely trying to paint a narrative. Like he's got to admit that these things are in there because people are literate now.
Yeah.
And he's got to admit to it, but he needs to spin it in a certain narrative direction. And that's the narrative direction he wants to go.
And I would just last thing, I would encourage everybody that's watching, like, as we listen to him do this, where they're really different thing, ask yourself the question, like, if you, or think about it, if you were to ask him the question at the end, so it sort of sounds like, Jay, that you're saying maybe it wasn't so bad. Would you want it to come back today? Right? Because, like, what if, people went into debt and there wasn't some fail safe, right? And would it be okay for us to take a person as property? Because that even if they volunteer at time T or whatever it is, like the beginning, 2 weeks later, there is no voluntary anymore, right? They're there. It's that, like, that they're there. At that point, their consent is irrelevant because they consented at time T. And so, like, are we okay with that? Of course not, right? So what is that? Why is he, except as you say, just trying to whitewash it as much as possible?
Yeah, definitely do not pose that question to G-Man. All right, I can't go through another situation. And in case people don't know, Josh and I debated G-Man and Veckel, since this has come up a couple times. But an audience member asked if G-Man would subject himself to biblical slavery and be my slave. And I'm like, I am way too white and Southern for this question. Could we move on?
And if anyone's unclear, G-Man is a person of color.
Yes. And so
it was very uncomfortable.
It was. I was uncomfortable. Like I did one of those very nervous laughs. Like, I don't know, the emoji where you're laughing, but there's like sweat coming down. Like that was me. After that, I was the embodiment of that emoji at that point.
That's awful.
All right. Let's hear what else J Warner Wallace has to say.
As a matter of fact, that's another way that they were different. The way into slavery in the New World, of course, was involuntary. People were subjugated into slavery. But in the ancient Near East, often people entered into this kind of servitude voluntarily to pay a debt.
Sorry, just often. He said it. Like, come on, man. Come on, man. I mean, you can hear him. I guess he, maybe this is a guy should pat him on the back here. Like, at least he's not just outright lying about it, right? Like, often it was voluntary. Okay.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm getting very, very like a very used car salesman vibe off it, because it's like, he's like, often it does run reliably.
Yes.
And oftentimes all four wheels stay on it. Oftentimes the clutch doesn't fall directly out the bottom. And I feel like anybody listening to this would be like, wait, hold on a second.
Right.
Often?
Often?
What's often mean to you? Like 65% of the time? Like, it's not like a nearly never. It's often.
God.
But yeah, so obviously, like I said before, he's driving a narrative. He's only looking at these, like, the way that he wants to paint slavery. It seems like he's painting it by using those kinds of very, not really sneaky words, but he's being very specific about how he describes it.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, the way out of slavery was different, right? I mean, in the New World, there was no way out of slavery. In the ancient Near Eastern, there were several biblical pathways for slaves to be freed. Actually, the way slaves were treated was even different.
Okay.
In the New World,
let's pause it there. So I'll also remember that almost every argument that he makes, in fact, it may be every argument that he makes, you could just as easily make it for the rest of the ancient Near East, right? Slavery and the laws of Hammurabi, slavery and the laws of Eshnunna, slavery and the laws of Lapidishtar. Like, when you look at the slave laws that were on or in these, law collections, these law codes, sometimes, for example, the law of manumission and the laws of Hammurabi was better from our vantage point than, and probably from theirs as well, than that in the Hebrew Bible, right? In the Hebrew Bible, you serve as a debt slave, you serve for 6 years and were released in the 7th, free of debt. In Hammurabi, you only had to serve for 3 years and you were released in the 4th, free of debt. So half the time. So, like, anyway, the point is that just because there's not a one-to-one correspondence, and so that it's clear, what he's describing very often is the way that slaves, what happened boots on the ground, what happened practically in the antebellum South, which often resulted from breaking laws that were on the books. He's often comparing that to the laws that were in the law collections in the Hebrew Bible, which is unfortunately not a fair comparison.
Right. And I know that in the new edition of your book, don't you cover like the laws governing antebellum South slavery?
Yeah.
Do you do a comparison between that and the laws in the ancient Near East?
Yes, in a roundabout way. Basically, what I'm trying to do in the antebellum South section of the book is actually show you the laws. And I won't be able to see terribly well with my as it's set up here, but let's see. I could probably read one without too much trouble. It feels so good. This book is so big. Okay.
The book.
Any person who shall this is Georgia's Constitution in 1798. Any person who shall maliciously dismember or deprive a slave of life shall suffer such punishment as would be inflicted in case the like offense had been committed on a free white person, and on the like proof, except in case of insurrection by the such slave, and unless such death should happen by accident in giving such slave moderate correction. That sound familiar at all?
It does.
Exodus 21, 20 to 21. So by the time you get to it, and I do mention it periodically, but like you see the same types of tensions being wrestled with in both ancient Near Eastern law collections and in the antebellum South.
Yeah. Now, what Wallace here is describing are Israelite slaves, but what about non-Israelite slaves? I mean, were they released after the 7 years?
No,
like Wallace is saying.
That's right. So, and even so, yeah, certainly foreigners. Again, the big passage that we always talk about is Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, which is slaves taken from the foreign nations around, also taken from tenant farmers that are living in the midst of Israel and from their families. They become property passed on as inheritance. They serve forever. But those aren't the only people. Even Israelites can become chattel slaves, right? So in Exodus 21, 2 to 6, if certainly the woman, the wife that's given to the debt slave is a chattel slave, any children that they have are chattel slaves. They're born into slavery. And the husband himself, the debt slave, can voluntarily give up his right to release and can become a chattel slave himself. So, yeah, I mean, Israelites, theoretically, Israelite males, theoretically, as debt slaves, would have the right to release, but could forfeit it. And other Israelites, women, children, didn't necessarily have that right.
Yeah. But sorry, KC said, but they were forfeit so that they could stay with their family.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's see if he can make it more than 10 seconds without saying something stupid.
World slavery we think about, slaves were treated as property. In the ancient Near East, they were given the same rights, and they were actually laid out by biblical mandates, the rights that other human beings are given.
Pause it.
What?
Like, this is it. If anybody is ever in a discussion and somebody makes a statement like this, just pause them and say, show me. Show me the rights, right? Show me the rights that they have, because the rights that they're going to show are like, well, they got off on the Sabbath, right? And you couldn't kill them, and you weren't supposed to abuse them. You can't abuse them. And then you could say things like, okay, so what happens if an ox gores a free person and they die? Death penalty for the master, the owner of the ox. What happens if they gore a slave?
You owe them like 5 shekels.
30 shekels of silver, right?
Yeah.
It's property damage. Not exactly the same. So yeah, I mean, they absolutely were treated as property. The difference that, again, in these discussions, I find that people don't go any further than that word property. So they don't, when they say treated as property, what they think that means is they could do absolutely whatever they wanted to them. And that's not really what the law provided for, right? It meant that they were owned. It meant that they didn't have the right to leave. It didn't. It meant that they had to do the work that the master told them to do, and that the master could beat them, right? But it didn't mean that the master could necessarily abuse them, and certainly didn't mean that they could kill them. So there was an aspect of their humanity, but that doesn't mean what Wallace here thinks it means, right? Just because there was an aspect to their humanity that was considered doesn't mean that that put them on equal footing with a free person. Just didn't mean that.
Yeah. I remember one time I had heard somebody say that the slaves were even given like a wage, and you know, like they could go out and they could buy things from shops and everything. Like they were essentially not a slave, it seems, and they were paid wages. I mean, I don't recall that being in the Old Testament or in the New Testament.
They might be misunderstanding one of two things, maybe both. One, in Leviticus 25, 39 to 43, where the law develops in the Holiness Code and says, hey, remember how you used to be able to keep Israelite slaves for 6 years instead of 3? You can't do that anymore. You can't treat them as slaves. You have to keep them as hired workers. So you have to pay them, right? That's Israelites. So they could be confusing that. That's specifically not a slave. The text says you can't make them a slave. You have to instead treat them as a hired worker. Or they might be thinking about like something like the parable of the talents in, where is it? I can't remember what passage in Luke, but you know, I actually think it's in Matthew as well, but New Testament's I feel. But you know, where it talks about like the master goes away and gives, you know, 10 talents, I think of gold, might have been a silver, I can't remember, to one slave, gives 5 talents to another slave, and then 1 talent to the last one. Well, that wasn't their money. That was what's called their peculium, right? They're utilizing that to, and it might not have even fallen under that category, but it was money that was the master's. It vested in the master, and they were investing it for the master. That was the whole point of the parable. So the question that you now shut up, but the question that you always ask in those circumstances is, if the slave dies, where's the money go? Where does the money vest? Does it vest with the slave's family, or does it vest back with the master? If it goes back to the master, it's not the slaves.
Okay. Let's see if he can make it at least 10 seconds.
Why are these two things so different? Well, let's just be careful when we talk about what it is God might condone. Are we talking about the kind of New World slavery that we think of today, or something very different? And it's different in really the way you entered, the way you got out, the way you were treated while you were there. Very different concepts. We're going to give you.
I'm sorry. I mean, he took like really small parts of each of those 3. He was wrong about several of them, but like he took these little parts and focused on them. Were they property, Jay? Hey, look at that over there, right? Like,
look at this red car. This is a crazy red car over here.
Right. Did they get passed on as inheritance, Jay? Well, now, you know, like, yeah. So it's just silly.
Yeah, and I like how he talks about these things as if this was monolithically how it was done, like in the Bible. Like not that there are differences in it. Like he seems to be very blind to the differences between like Israelite debt slaves and non-Israelite foreigner chattel slaves. Like he's definitely wanting to focus on how the Israelites were treated in slavery, how they were able to get out of slavery and everything like that. And I feel like if you were possibly to compare like the debt slavery in Israel to I don't know if there was debt slavery or any kind of like debt servitude or anything like that in America at any point. I know that there was like debtor's prison at
Hmm.
one point, and they've done away with that. But I don't know if there was like actual debt slavery. I think maybe I wonder if I don't know if sharecropper would be similar to that, where somebody works the land for somebody and they end up getting some of the money, but they have to give some anyways. Didn't look at any of that, so let's just blow right past it and see what else dumb shit he's got to say.
Be another thing to think about as you try to answer this briefly. We have certain things in place, certain institutions in place that answer or solve certain problems for us. So for example, if you're in debt to a financial institution, well, we have financial institutions that could figure out what to do with that debt. If you don't pay your debts, you're going to end up in some kind of legal trouble, and you may actually go to jail. Well, it turns out we have financial institutions today, and we also have penitentiary systems today to deal with these two issues. Those weren't in place in the ancient Near East.
Okay.
If you were somebody,
Yeah, I see. I don't know what he doesn't know. Yeah, it's hard for me to, because all I can go by is what he's saying.
Mhm.
So it's true there weren't like banks in the sense that we think about them, right? You had merchants, you had creditors that would make loans to people, right? And the law regulated that, and to varying degrees, and so and creditors, when they gave out loans, they took risks, right? And they recognized that they were taking those risks. And so they put things in place to try to make it so that they could recoup their losses. Um, but I mean, like, I don't understand why this is. And secondly, they did have prisons. They weren't the, institutions that we have today, obviously. But I mean, they still had places where people were held, right? So I mean, we have like Sumerian hymns about these these, but the I think the broader point here, and this is something that I talk about in the conclusion of the new book, is I have found, and it could be used so many times if you were talking to J Warner Wallace in person here and he were talking about this stuff to you. I have the ending that says, therefore what? And that is, and I won't spoil it, but I mean, like, that can be such a powerful response to someone in this situation, because you listen to them and say, oh, well, yeah, they had to treat them really well. Therefore, what, Jay? Slavery okay? Like, owning people is okay if they treat them well? Well, see, it doesn't really get them where they want it to go. What it does is it sort of throws up a bit of a smoke screen. It makes you think, oh, well, that is different. And then you can kind of push the bad stuff further back in your mind. But if you call it back to his attention and make him follow through and say, therefore what? So, okay, it's not race-based. Therefore, it's okay that it was based on their ethnicity instead. It's okay that you took them as slaves because they were poor, because they were foreigners. Like, this makes it okay? I don't understand. What's that, your point, Jay? So, yeah, the therefore what, I think, can be very powerful.
No, I definitely see the power in asking that question, because you end up putting them in the position of having to affirm, oh, well, owning another person was fine as long as it's this kind of owning a person.
Yep. As long as you follow these rules when you do it.
Yeah.
somebody who had a debt in the ancient Near East, there was no financial institution to kind of come and mitigate that debt. And there were no penitentiaries that could place people in custody. The vast majority of people who were involved in voluntary servitude, called slavery, were people who had a financial debt to pay off, or were people who had committed a war crime or other crime that they were paying off.
Okay, I don't know what he means by war crime there. Maybe it was just a slip of the tongue for him. But here's a great example. So slavery was done because people had debts to pay off. Therefore, what?
Slavery's okay.
I mean, if they're paying off debts, huh? Come on, Jay.
Well, I'm wondering if the war crime thing is talking about how the Israelites were commanded by God to like attack certain like cities or civilizations and take certain individuals in that society as like a prisoner of war. And so like one that's coming up in my head are the virgin girls from the Midianite civilization. God commanded them to go in, kill everybody, even young children, except for the virgin girls, and to take them so that they can make them wives. No
But
regard
they
for
were
consent or anything.
but they were explicitly not the ones who committed war crimes, right? Or did anything. That's the whole reason that they're called out, because they couldn't have done those things, right? Like they weren't the
Right.
ones enticing the men. They weren't. Yeah, so like and to be clear, Deuteronomy 20, the marching orders are, you don't take prisoners of war. You kill the men. You kill the
Mhm.
fighting force. You take the civilians, what we would consider to be the civilians, as plunder.
Mhm.
Like, this isn't the flex he thinks it is.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was trying to rationalize what he might mean by
Yeah, sure.
war crimes.
Yeah.
And I know that the common apologetic for Numbers 31 is that the Midianites deserved it because of a perceived slight against the Israelites. And so they were in like a conflict, or they were in a war, and so that made it okay. And it's kind of like, and then therefore what?
Yeah,
Like it
right.
was okay to kill everybody in there except for the virgin girls. Like that made it okay.
And
Like,
are
can
we
you
okay?
imagine?
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, can you imagine the pushback or the ramifications of the United States military going into like some Middle Eastern town, wiping everybody out, but keeping all the little virgin girls to ship back home as wives? Like
Even
that.
if you just kept them as slaves, like, and I hate even saying that sentence, just, right? But like, so what? We have soldiers coming back, bringing back, all right, here, okay, here's our new slave. Like, what? Come on, Jay.
Yeah. Well, and then of course, there's the argument that, oh well, God was creating these laws or making these commands and everything like that because that's what that society would accept, right? Like God was bound by what man would accept from God, and that always kind of perplexes me because it's like, I'm sorry, in this section God tells you how to encrust the interior of his temple with gold and rubies and all this other stuff so that you can worship him properly. He even shoves fireballs up the asses of two priests that use the wrong kind of fire to light his incense. But yeah, slavery is just a little too far.
I actually I deal with this one, this apologetic argument in the new edition. So yeah, it's just it doesn't work in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Oh, sorry, honey. What did you say? Oh, you don't remember now? She heard fireballs up the ass and she forgot what she mentioned.
Those systems were in place to deal with wrongdoers or people who were in debt. And they didn't have the institutions that we have today. So you can see why they might resort to other means to solve those two problems. So let's be careful when we talk about slavery and what kind of slavery, quote unquote, God would condone.
what kind of slavery, quote unquote, like as if it's some kind of like weird like term to apply to this point in time.
What type of Mr. Belvedere ship that he might condone? God.
I mean, I feel like it's very clear now the kind of distancing language he's using from it, because now it seemed, and like that part, it seemed like he's trying to distance God from this whole idea of slavery in general, as if to put it in quotes, as if, oh, this is what other people call it, but it really wasn't this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Different way in, different way out. A different way you were treated while you were there, a pathway that could get you out. And it's really only a last resort, because they lack the kinds of institutions and structures that would take care of the problem in a different way.
And every one of those things, granting all of them, would have been true in the wider ancient Near East. Was he okay with slavery there? I mean, I doubt it. So,
well, yeah, and like he's done the entire time, he's totally only focusing on the Israelite slavery, debt slavery, and everything,
right,
while foregoing the chattel slavery. When people say slavery, like they're not being specific about debt slavery, like in this particular, like typically, or at least I know whenever I mention, whenever I say God condones slavery, we're talking specifically about chattel slavery. But it kind of seems like J Warner Wallace wants to reorient it and be like,
right,
no, they're just trying to pay off debts and shit.
And finally, let me just give you one last thing to think about. The same Bible that people say condones slavery was the text that the abolitionist movement used to free the slaves. The same Bible that was misinterpreted to condone New World slavery when the Bible...
Misinterpreted. Good one.
Yeah. I mean, is there really a like, I feel like Leviticus 44, 20, or 25, 44 through 46, like, I feel like there's not a misinterpretation there. Now, I know that we've covered Paul Copan before, who tried to introduce like a new interpretation for that passage, but like just on a basic reading of it, I mean, there's no real way to get around the fact that you're purchasing people as property there, and you can pass them on to your kids and everything as property.
That's right.
Like, there's no misinterpreting that. It's like, I feel like at this point, a lot of apologists are like, listen, I know what the words say on the page, but they're not there. You just got to be a little blind about it. You got to be like John Cena. Like, can you see me? No, you can't.
Gosh.
Bible was not describing New World slavery to begin with, is the same text that Wilberforce used as part of the abolitionist movement.
Case closed. Sorry,
case closed. We close this cold case, motherfuckers. I feel like it's very disingenuous to be like, the Bible doesn't describe New World slavery. Like, of course it doesn't describe New World slavery, but it does describe slavery.
Yeah.
On the basis of what was that movement started? On the basis of a biblical notion that all of us are of the same family, that we are not to be treated differently, that there is no race in the eyes of God, that humans look at the outward condition of man, but God looks at the heart, that we have a certain dignity as humans in the image, created in the image of God, that there is no brown race, white race, yellow race, red race. There's just a human race in the eyes of God.
I mean, again, clear theological approach here, right? Harmonizing the textual data. Israelites? No. Foreigners? Yes. Right? Like, that one's a tough one to get around. So, yeah.
Well, and I feel like what he's mentioning here is the one verse in one of Paul's epistles. I can't remember. Might be Corinthians. I can't remember, but it's where Paul says, like, there's no male, no female, no
Galatians
slave.
3:28. Yeah.
Oh, Galatians.
I deal with that in the book too.
Yeah. And the way that I respond to that is that that's like a different context than society, like their society that they're working in. That's not saying that, oh, all slaves should be free. that's saying like as far as your salvation goes, like theologically as your salvation goes, like you can be a slave and a Christian, but you're still getting into heaven. Like that's the theological message that's being communicated there. But all these apologists want to act like, oh, this is a condemnation of slavery. And it's really not.
John, it's clearly a condemnation. Paul is clearly saying there is no difference between males and females. I'll just let them sit with that for a minute.
That throws a wrench in their transphobia for sure.
You're like, damn it. Preach, John. Oh. Damn it, Bobby.
Let me do damn it, Bobby.
I'm a veteran of 2 foreign wars. Damn it, they're the ones been whacking. Okay, sorry.
You do a really good Hank Hill too.
I don't know if that was a compliment, John. I don't know.
My wife says, but can you do Burcephus?
I'm daggone them. No, not nearly as well.
No, that's Bumhauer.
Burcephus. No, I definitely can't do. Sorry, I was thinking.
There's only one Burcephus around here.
Yeah.
See, I can do a pretty good depiction of him. Close.
Not exactly.
Wasn't drunk enough. Yeah, that's true. All right. I think he's almost done with the biblical slavery portion of this because it's slavery and genocide.
Yeah.
That is the clear teaching of Scripture and the teaching that motivated and propelled the abolitionist movement. Does the Bible condone slavery? Of course not.
No.
But does it describe slavery? Yes, it does, but not the slavery that you might be thinking of.
Totally different. Good one. Good job, Jay. We're proud of you, buddy.
Yeah, and so just sort of coming back around to something that I said at the beginning of the stream tonight, and that's that I feel like his point is moot there because of course he's focusing on abolitionists and how they use the Bible, but he's not even mentioning how the slave traders who weren't abolitionists, they also used the Bible in order to justify the chattel slavery in the South. But I feel like all of this really kind of speaks past the topic in general of it, because like you said at the beginning, it doesn't matter whether the interpretations of the Bible or whatnot. What matters is what are literally the words on the page. What does the Bible actually have in it? Not your interpretation of it, but what does it actually say? And I feel like that's the kind of the point that I feel like apologists don't want you to make.
That's right.
And because if you're fucking literate, I've said this before. It's like, well, excuse my literacy, but I can read the words on the page here. But let's see. I know, Dr. Josh, do you have time to listen to his genocide?
I think rant? If we'll probably have to move a little faster through it.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I think I can go for another 15 minutes or so.
Okay. Yeah, I know we got at least one super chat. If y'all have a question, I mean, I could go ahead and read a super chat. Hold on. Let's do it since this is on slavery. We got Carlos Rodriguez. Thank you so much, Dr. Josh. Is the new book on OT slavery going to be coming out in hardback or paperback? I think you said it's already in paperback.
It's already in paperback. You can order it right now in paperback. So we had a request. We weren't going to do a hardcover just because of how thick it is. They wouldn't do the hardcover, but we had some people request it. And so what we're thinking of doing is changing the dimensions a little bit. We just got to see how hard it's going to be to do. And that would make it, the pagination, the page number go down, and then it would fit within the hardcover restrictions. So maybe, but definitely paperback. Paperback is out. You can go to Amazon and get it right now.
Okay. And I've heard on a good authority that your new book can kill a person.
That was
So
when the proof came. She sent me a video and she was like, "Man, this thing's heavy. This could hurt somebody." That's what I was going for. I don't.
I could just imagine like having getting a hardback copy and then dropping it on a table and being like, "You sure you want to fuck with me?" All right. Let's see if we can get through this genocide portion. I believe that I've already responded to this on my channel, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And we'll go only for about 15 more minutes and then we'll get on out of here.
Does the Bible condone genocide? Many current atheists in the last 10 years have made claims against Christianity based on what they see as a kind of a horrific behavior of the God they see in the Old Testament. They will typically point to the destruction of the Canaanites or the Amalekites, and they'll say, hey, how could God be so horrific to kill entire people groups? It appears to these folks that God is genocidal.
I'm sorry. You just got to pause it? Like, that's crazy. What's these new atheists read stuff about killing whole civilizations? Like, it's crazy that they think this is bad, that God is bad. Yeah, that's true, Jay. Good one. Like, it's weird that you don't think that. But yeah, these weird new atheists look at this killing large groups of people and think this is bad.
Well, okay, look, Josh, obviously you're just not reading the words with the correct light. You got to lift the butt cheek and then squint your eye, and then you got to read it so that you can't really read the words all that great.
Noted. Sorry, go ahead. Just thought that was sad.
How do we respond to that even quickly? Do we know enough about our Old Testament to be able to give a response at all?
Do we know enough about our Old Testament to be able to say, well, maybe you should read it this other way? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Well, I mean, he's definitely setting it up to be like, well, does God really even call for the killing of people? I mean, we don't really know that much about the Old Testament to be able to say so. Also, if he does, he probably has a good reason for it.
Let me just give you a couple of quick ways to respond to that. First of all, it's always helpful, and especially in criminal trials that I'm involved in, to clarify terms, right? I mean, if we're not both on the same page, a defense attorney and a prosecutor can make two statements about the same term, and they can kind of both go over the heads of the jury because we haven't defined the term to begin with. What do we mean when we say genocide? What are we saying when we say genocide?
So in my response to this, I was like, yes, it's a good idea to define terms, genocide. And then like, there's like an actual internationally agreed upon definition of genocide, which isn't just wiping out an entire like group of people completely.
Right.
Like there's different types of genocide. There's cultural genocide where you try to wipe out their culture.
Yep.
That's been done several times. And then there's wiping out an entire group of people. But there's also the intent of it. Like you go in and you intend to wipe out everybody. Just because you don't successfully do it doesn't mean that it wasn't a genocide. And I believe under what J Warner Wallace is about to go through, there was no Holocaust. Like in his, because of the way that he defines genocide, there was no Holocaust for him. So demonetized. we got hit. So we recently got this whole performance bonus thing on Facebook. And they started paying for like posting stuff and getting interactions and everything like that. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I'll post a few times a day. And, that's just a little bit of extra, pocket change or whatnot. No shit. We posted the Rudy Giuliani lawsuit transcript and said, oh, this man is disgusting. And it's like, that's hate speech. Now you can't earn money.
Wow.
Men can be disgusting. Sorry, honey. Men can be disgusting. And and so it was labeled as hate speech, and that's the final, like they said, we reviewed this and it's definitely hate speech. No more monetization for you. You're just too risky to make money off of. get people to interact with.
There
And
are
so,
no
like,
financial institutions and prisons to take care of this, John. So that's why they had to do it that way.
All right, let's see if we can power through the last few minutes here.
Entire destruction of an entire, it sounds like you just don't like that people group, and based on your bias and prejudice and hatred of that group, you decided to wipe the whole group out. Is that really what's being described in the Old Testament?
That's also not genocide.
They killed them for a completely different reason.
Therefore, it's not genocide.
It's not bad if they did it that way. Sorry.
The reality of course, is that the Canaanites, for example, all of these people groups were involved in horrific behaviors that God had warned them about for hundreds of years. The kind of stuff that you think, really? How does that even happen? These groups would do things like to sacrifice a child and put that child in the wall of the home they were building so that that sacrificed child would actually bless the new home. They would sometimes place babies on the hot hands of the idol of the God they were worshiping. And God came to them repeatedly
he
and
just has
said,
no idea what he's talking about. But, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and so God's solution is to kill the babies before they're sacrificed. If
anybody's interested in this, I like promoting this volume, and not just because I have a chapter in it, because I don't make any money from this one, but Misusing Scripture, What Are Evangelicals Doing with the Bible? It's a new publication from Routledge, but some friends of mine were the editors, but I contributed a chapter to on violence and genocide in the Hebrew Bible and evangelical misuse of it, and I deal precisely with the two things that he talks about in this video. The first one he just talked about, they deserved it. They deserved it. That's the first apologetic defense. So.
Yeah, and I know a lot of times they try to distinguish like the actions of the Israelites because of the practices of these groups, and they're describing child sacrifice. And I've made numerous arguments that use like Jephthah's daughter as an example of God being perfectly fine with a child sacrifice. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, and maybe your reading of the Bible, but it seems like God was more concerned with whether or not these children were being sacrificed for him rather than the actual act of sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated issue. The Hebrew Bible sort of has developing theology on this as it moves forward. We definitely have remnants of it, but Heath Durrell, so I don't go into much detail here, Heath Durrell has an excellent interview on our channel about this, but it's based on his dissertation, which he had published into a book. And I think the title of it is Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel. But basically what he's doing is he's looking at the three different types of child sacrifice that were practiced in ancient Israel, and they were directed to Yahweh. So,
yeah. I want to say that I referenced that because that title sounds familiar to me.
This needs to stop, and warn them for hundreds of years. And at the end of all of that, when they did not heed the warning of God, yes, he commands the destruction of these folks.
But I mean, but the children too. Like he was very specific. Like God is very specific. Like he lays out the groups of people, men and women, young and old, fucking everybody. Leave nothing. I believe the phrase is leave nothing alive.
Yeah. And what's crazy about what's on the screen right now is he doesn't reference verses 10 to 15. Because his argument here, and then we should probably wrap it up just because I don't want to make Megan's got to teach class tonight. Yeah. She needs to get in here and prep, but she's teaching Sumerian for the final time tonight, which is pretty cool.
Oh, awesome.
But like the passage in 10 to 15 is okay. Yeah, in 16 to 18, you kill everybody that's in Canaan, right? You kill all of them. But what about the nations that are at a distance outside of Canaan, right? Well, they're not bad on their face, or like it's not assumed that these are bad cities, because the first thing you do is, according to the law, you go up and you offer them vassalage. You say, hey, we offer you a peace treaty, serve, act as our vassals, and we'll let you stay in your city. Everything will be great. And then when we want corvée labor, we'll come get you, right? And you can act as corvée labor for us. So like the command isn't to destroy them, right? It's just to treat them as corvée labor. Now, of course, if they put up a fight, then you're supposed to kill all the men and take the women, children, animals, everything as plunder for yourselves. But he didn't want to talk about those verses, I wouldn't imagine.
He probably wouldn't have. What I wouldn't want to. So do you get time to play more video, or do you want to go ahead and wrap up?
Yeah, we probably should. I just I guess I remember the second thing that he talks about. And again, I have a chapter in the Atheist Handbook, Volume 2, that talks about this, and then that chapter that's in that evangelical volume. But his other argument is the hyperbole argument that I know you've become incredibly familiar with. And I'll just say this about it, because there's so much that we could say. But John Collins said it best. I brought this up to him several years ago in an interview on violence in the Bible. And I said, so what do you think about that? That it was just hyperbole. And he said, yeah, in a lot of places, they killed a lot of people and they claim to have killed more. Right on. Like, that's as good a way to say it as any.
Yeah, I feel like it's similar to the slavery claim, because it's like, here's this thing over here, but here's this thing, it's just not as bad.
Right.
So then it's just, I guess, yeah, it's all okay. They didn't kill every single person.
Come on,
they just
that would be
claimed
ridiculous.
to have.
Right.
They just claimed to have killed everybody, trying to show their big dicks around.
Right, that 15-foot whale penis.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Josh, I really appreciate you joining me tonight. I know that, this was kind of a tricky scheduling situation between me and you, but I'm so glad that we were able to talk about your new book. And do you want to show your book one more time? Let people know where they can get it and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to Amazon and type in Joshua Bowen, all of our books will come up. I think the thing that I like to say now is, maybe I shouldn't, I'm not sure, but our books pretty quickly end up on those pirated websites, or the pirate websites, which, like, there's part of me that's okay with that, because at least it gets out there, and people that can't afford the book can still get it and read it. The problem, of course, is that this is actually, we publish them ourselves, and it's like, it costs money to do that, and lots of time, obviously, and lots of effort. And so we lose out on sales when that happens. So what we do say to people is, if you really can't afford every book that we write, we price at $9.99 on the Kindle, so that hopefully most people can afford it. If you can't, though, if you absolutely can't, email us at digitalhammurabi@gmail.com, and we have a PDF, like a locked PDF or whatever, that we send to people for free that can't afford it. So, but yeah, if you can afford to get a copy of the new book, it would really, really help. And like John said, if you could, hi, buddy, you want to come say hi? If you can leave like a recommendation or whatever, that would be awesome. Can you say hi?
Hi.
It's Oliver.
Hey,
They're saying
Oliver,
hi.
how you doing?
He's asked how you're doing.
Good.
Oh, good.
Good.
All right. Well, I'll be out in just a minute. Okay.
Look.
Oh, that's a really cool shirt.
Not a shirt. It's
Oh.
a towel dress.
A towel dress. Sorry. I
Oh.
sit corrected. High five. Ow.
Sorry.
You're so strong.
Yeah, because I think I worked out a bit.
You did work out a
Of
bit.
course. I went around a lot.
All right.
Super speed, of course.
Super speed. Okay.
Yeah.
Go. I'll be out in just a minute to read to you. I love you. Get Harry Potter.
Yeah, I miss Xander at that age.
Yeah.
No, or I was gonna say, or y'all could do what I do, and that's that I buy the Kindle book so that I can read it wherever I want to, but then I also buy the paperback, and then Casey, she buys the paperback, and we end up with multiple copies, and we bug the authors to like sign the books too. You know, we even mail the shit out directly to their houses. I'm not recommending that for everybody, but I'm just saying, like, buy the book and buy the Kindle. The Kindle, for me personally, I love having the Kindle so I can search through it. And, I mean, the PDF also, you can search through it too, but I mean, I like having it on the Kindle.
Thank
That
you.
always makes it a lot easier. Plus, I know, hon. Plus, on the Kindle app on the iOS, I don't know if you know this, Josh, but now this is maybe a good selling point. But you can highlight sections, and then you can have the Kindle app actually create an image that can be shared like on social media.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I did
like
not
as
know
a
that.
quote meme. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So I mean that I've used that a couple of times. I get a couple of friends that like to do that and put it out there too. So,
Nice.
but that's an interesting thing. Everybody, well, my point is everybody buy books, Josh's books twice, and
Thank
fuck
you.
the pirate websites. But anyways, I know that you got to go. Again, I appreciate you so much for being on here. I appreciate the audience for joining us tonight, and you know, being here to watch us respond to J Warner Wallace, or the dipshit detective, as I lovingly call him. Lovingly, since we're doing air quotes around basic words, lovingly. Anyways, I'll let you go. Thank you so much, Josh, and I guess we will see you heathens later. Bye, everybody. Bye, heathens.